Hey Scott, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, how are you?
Here we are on a Monday night. So Scott and I are here. This is Dr. Rob's normal live Q&A, but he is on vacation today. So we are going to answer your questions from a recovery standpoint, and you can always come back next week and ask them of an expert clinician, Dr. Rob. Or go to David's on Wednesday, he'll be there. So the first question is, I'm looking for a CSAT. I have noticed that some use the 30 task model and some don't. At least the ITAP directory makes that appear that way. I purchased the Recovery Start Kit and want to use it. Do you think I should try to find someone who specifically uses the 30 task model, or does it even matter?
Um,
I'm really well versed in this. You want me to start?
yes, you.
I actually worked with ITAP for a number. I'm going to let you know I worked for ITAP for a number of years. So the Recovery Start Kit is a lot of content, and it's a very systematic way of going through things. I think if you're a person who likes to do things and check things off, it can be a really helpful way of doing that. I do think having a therapist who is able to go through things with you on that level, and probably more therapists use the 30 tasks or some portion of it. They're pretty good at kind of using what they want and not using other pieces. That said, I think there are some that are identified as using the Recovery Start Kit and many don't. And I mean, they all have training in it. That doesn't mean, and this is not being snarky or dismissive of them, that doesn't mean that they all have a level of comfort, or use it. The other thing about the 30 task is it's over a long period of time. And many therapists only work with you while you're in crisis, or it's a shorter period of time. Often people go, oh, I feel better, and then they leave. And so it really is looking at this as a longer term journey. So there's a lot of great content in it. I really think that there's a lot of value in it, but I saw Scott went and got
book, Sex Addiction 101, the workbook, which is the workbook that goes with Dr. Rob Weiss's book. It is exactly this thick. You can actually do this one and finish it in your lifetime. And full disclosure, I'm partial to this. I helped write it, but Dr. Carnes's stuff, the books are an inch and a half thick. They're kind of endless. They're very thorough. And if you want to do that, great. If you're not one of those people, look for something a little more straightforward and direct and to the point. I personally am straightforward and direct and to the point. And
I appreciate the language. And I mean, like, one of my complaints before used to be Dr. Carnes writes to kind of the academic level, and great, but I always feel like if you're in crisis, like be a straight shooter, just tell me what I need to do, do this. And so the language in Sex Addiction 101 and the workbook is I think more on point for many people. And just to give a little plug, I did it before the recording, but I'm going to do it again, and more of you have joined. Scott and our colleague Jason lead a Sex Addiction 101 work group. And we actually have multiples of those going on right now. Those are a 6-week course, and all it is, well, you should talk about it, but it's structured time to work through the workbook. There's level 1 and level 2. So 90 minutes over 6 weeks. The next one starts January 4th. We hear consistently very good feedback on how helpful it is to work through it, because having the workbook and having it sitting on your table is not going to, by osmosis, give you the insights that you need, but having it in a dialogue and a lecture format has been really helpful. So anything else you'd like to say about that?
No, we also are going to start a level 3 probably at some point in January. We're going to set a date for that.
You have to take level 1 and level 2 in order to qualify for level 3. So as with everything, start at level 1.
Level 1 is the basic info, what sex addiction is, how we combat it. Level 2 starts to look at underlying issues. Level 3 is sort of moving forward in life.
Yeah. Good stuff. It's an option. It's not for everybody, but so I had this conversation with somebody on the phone. I'm going to take just a moment here. On seekingintegrity.com, you'll find options like the work groups, level 1, level 2, Dr. David's ChemSex work group. We have another one starting in January, and then a couples workshop that will be for a limited number of couples over 6 weeks, 90 minutes a session. And all of those are on there, information about our treatment program. So Scott and I both had support sessions earlier today. We do those when people are looking for support. We are not therapists. We don't do any of that. Dr. Rob and Dr. David do expert consultations. All of that can be found on seekingintegrity.com. On sexandrelationshiphealing.com is where you'll find all the free resources like the podcasts, which have topped over 600,000 now for downloads. Yay. The blogs, resources like this webinar, there's links to this. The drop-in groups, we have a variety of drop-in groups for both addicts and partners. So all of the free stuff is on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There are paid resources. The work groups are a nominal fee, I think, if it helps you get your life on track. The work groups, the level 1 and 2 are $350 US. We have people that join from outside the US. So again, options. This is free. Glad you're here. So anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Next question. I am single and haven't masturbated in 10 months, 1 year sober from porn. My sponsor has encouraged me to move masturbation out of my inner circle. I don't feel particularly urgent to do so. And frankly, I'm a little fearful since porn and masturbation was my main form of acting out. However, I'm open to the idea, especially because sexual anorexia and religious shame is part of my background. What do you think? Any suggested boundaries for healthy self-love, i.e. masturbation?
This is always the big question when you're setting up your sexual sobriety plan. For those who don't know, we do what we call a circle plan. The inner circle is our bottom line problem behaviors. The middle circle is slippery stuff that might lead us back into the bottom line behaviors. And then the outer circle is healthy stuff that we can do to enjoy our lives and be happy and healthy in recovery. So you've got masturbation in your inner circle. And it's a great place to start with it. I always encourage people to err on the side of caution when they set up their plans. As far as taking it out of the middle circle or the inner circle, the problem bottom line behaviors and moving it into kind of a slippery behavior or the middle circle, we have to pay attention to it. I can't make that call for you without a lot more information than I've got here. Porn obviously needs to stay in your inner circle, but masturbations often will come out of the inner circle and move into the middle circle. As far as suggested boundaries for self-love, I often have guys say, well, how many times a week can I masturbate? What can I fantasize about? Blah, blah, all of this stuff. And my take on it is more, why do you want to masturbate? Are you trying to escape your feelings? If so, there's probably a better way to deal with uncomfortable feelings. If I'm stressed out and I want to masturbate to relieve tension, maybe I should call my sponsor instead. Maybe I should take the dog for a walk. But if I want to have a self date and I want to, take myself out to dinner and watch my favorite movie and have a few minutes of happy alone time, I'm really personally okay with that. It's more about the motivation and how you feel afterward than how many times you can do it or what you should be thinking about when you're doing it. If you can feel like you've given yourself a gift after it, then it's probably healthy. But if you're feeling shame about it after, it probably wasn't so healthy. Now you've got some religious shame that you mentioned. That may be something you have to work through with a therapist. And that really is a one-on-one therapy issue or group therapy issue. So thoughts?
I agree with everything that Scott said, but I'm also noting my sponsor has encouraged me. So you have somebody who knows you well, who is encouraging you to move it. And so it's one of those, try. And if it's going to the place of fantasy and everything else and it's problematic for you, that's more things to talk about. But I really love, and Dr. Rob has talked about this too, the, you know, the date with self and making it an experience, and to be able to own you and your body and have that be the focus versus, you know, the images and the, you know, fantasy, etc. So so I'm really glad you're here and asking.
Yeah, sexual shame is something we really want to avoid in our recovery. And because it will lead us to sexual anorexia. Dr. Rob doesn't like the term sexual anorexia, but I think we all know what we're talking about here, not having any sex with self or others. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that if you're okay with it. But most people are not okay with it. So you've got to find a way to reintroduce sexuality in a healthy way in your life. And that's probably what your sponsor is suggesting. It may be time to think about moving forward as a sexual being, because we are all sexual beings, but to do it in a healthy way.
And like food, you know, like it's gonna be, oh, I ate too much chocolate cake, you know, or whatever. So there may be some of those moments or whatever, but to just go, I'm not going to do this perfectly. Unlike alcohol and chemicals, where, you know, like abstinence is very clear. This is what, you know, this is what it needs to be, is none. You know, with this, it's like, you know, I'm going to explore this. I'm going to stay in great communication with my sponsor, my mental health professional, all, you know, my posse, whatever, you know, and continue to look at this and find what's right for you for now. And then, like, you know, 6 more months from now, it may even be different, you know, who knows? So, okay, next question. I'm a male member of SAA for a while, sober from my bottom lines for a year and working a strong program. A lot of people in my recovery support network, including my sponsor, are encouraging me to start dating. I'm attracted to a woman who is also a recovering porn addict. She is respected within the community and also has a strong program. We serve on a service committee together, and I haven't told her that I'm attracted to her. I feel weird because normally I am very transparent with everything, but in this situation, I feel shy and haven't told her. What should I do?
You know, I love addicts when we decide we want to start dating, because we have no idea how. Whether we're alcoholics or drug addicts or sex addicts, you know, the moment we started using in our addiction one way or another is the moment that our emotional and romantic selves stop developing. So, I mean, I started drinking and using and acting out in middle school. And when I finally got sober, when it came to dating, I was basically in middle school. You know, I wanted to write a little note and have my friend deliver the note, and you know, that doesn't work very well as adults, and it's not a very healthy thing to do in recovery. The healthy thing, as I think you clearly know, is to be upfront and honest. But I would also make sure that before you approach this person, that you have support in place, because you may get rejected. And that will hurt if you do. You may not get rejected. She may feel the same way, and that would be lovely. And the two of you could, you know, work out a way to date that's healthy for both of you. This book, by the way, has a plan for singles, as I think the very last exercise, or the second to last, which helps you put together a dating plan. Part of which is, you know, you run it by, you know, your whole support network. I really like this woman. She's in recovery. She has solid recovery. I want to ask her to coffee. You know, is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Get some feedback first, and make sure you have support in place if you do decide to approach her. Because the one thing you don't want to do is lose your sobriety over a no answer or a yes answer. And you don't want her to endanger her sobriety either.
No, I agree with that, and it's challenging because you're on a committee, and that's, you know, and like, it's being a grown up, and if she says no, then it's like, you know, accept that and stay on the committee. You know, it's one of those where, okay, I can, you know, and you will grow through this.
Yeah,
it is how we learn.
Yeah, and I've had people in recovery ask me out, and I don't go out with anybody who I know through recovery first, because I need my 12-step rooms to be really, really safe. I don't want somebody that I had 2 dates with and decided I didn't like coming to my meetings, or vice versa. So you may get a no. There are some people like me who just say no. I don't, as my mother would say, don't shit where you eat. But that's kind of crude, but you get the idea.
So eloquently put.
I know.
We get
just
we get the
a
point.
lot of other people meet their life partners in recovery and have wonderful long-term relationships. So
yeah. So get support, you know, and
were you single when you entered recovery?
I was single when I entered recovery. I married someone who was in supposed recovery. That's a long story. I could do a whole webinar. I divorced him and now I'm married to a normie. And sometimes I think about his brain and go, I don't understand that. And I'm sure, I know for sure he does the same thing about mine, but we've figured things out. So, but I know lots of people actually, you know, who have navigated that. And I mean, like bunches of people come to mind that have navigated that in recovery. So it is not, you know, while Scott is 100% no, not everybody is, and for good reason. You know, there's a shared understanding.
Some of the best relationships I've seen started in recovery, but they set good boundaries and they made sure that they stayed sober, and you know.
Yes, we had support. So yes, okay. I am, this is a female. I am 3 years since D-Day. I have been doing my own recovery from betrayal. Is it okay to ask him about his progress in recovery, or should I focus on my own? He doesn't offer any information on his recovery and gets upset when I ask. I think I have the right to ask. Thanks. This is when I want to go bam and bang my head on the computer. So I won't.
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
and then answer.
He gets upset when I ask. I'm sorry, he was the betrayer. You are looking for safety. 3 years, I wanted to tear my hair out. I'm like, you should know what his plan is. What is he doing? If he says, I'm in recovery and you're supposed to believe that, I wouldn't. Like, what he's doing, what he's showing you is real. What he does is more telling than what his lips that have lied to you, you know, tell. 3 years is a long time. So you should be seeing significant progress. If he's working on his recovery with the same energy that he worked on his addiction, he would be great. And you would go, man, this guy is showing up. He's trustworthy, you know, all of this. You would know. So this to me feels like somebody who's dabbling, or like, oh, I'm going to my therapist for 50 minutes a week, or I'm doing, I heard this recently, you know, doing one group every 2 weeks. Not enough to change patterns that are so ingrained. I just mentioned my brain thinks different. If I am not diligent and working on that every day, really on some level, you know, I'm going to hurt myself and others. So what are your thoughts?
You know, if I was working with him and he said, you know, my wife keeps asking me questions about my recovery and it's annoying, my response would be, what are you hiding? Why can't you just answer the questions? What's the problem? You know, and you're probably sitting here thinking, if he won't tell me, he's probably up to something. And I don't blame you for thinking that. He may or may not be up to something in reality, but it's only natural that, you know, what are you hiding? Why won't you answer my questions? I'm with you all the way on this one. He should, you have the right to ask, and he has the obligation to answer.
Read out of the doghouse, and then as Dr. Rob says, throw it at him. It's a soft cover book. It won't hurt him, but you know, we have a podcast on it if he only will listen. So, you know, yeah, it's like it's his job to rebuild trust.
Yeah.
So that's not really helping. Yeah. Okay, next question. Is it appropriate to set a boundary for my sex addict husband to attend a 12-step program?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the one thing I want to say about boundaries is if you set a boundary, it's about your behavior, not his. You cannot force him to do anything or not do anything. What you can do is say, I would feel safer in our relationship and I would start to trust you more quickly if I knew you were going to a 12-step program and got a sponsor and you were working the steps. And when you don't do that, it causes me to feel unsafe and unsure of us. And I start thinking about, divorce or whatever it is that you start thinking about. And here are the things I'm going to do to protect myself. I'm going to ask you to move out. I'm going to, not let you see our kids. Whatever it is. But it's about you, not him. You can't force him to go to it. If you don't do this or else, that's not going to work. If you do this or don't do this, in this case, here is how I will respond, because I need to feel safe in my relationship. And right now I don't.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. So it's, here's the boundary I'm setting for me. What I need to see from you is this. And if you can't do that, then I'm going to hold this boundary for me. So.
Yeah.
I said it a little bit ago, if you spend as much energy on your recovery as you do on your acting out, you will be really doing well. So, okay. I recently started dating a girl. When is it appropriate time to share that I'm a porn addict? When is it appropriate to share whenever I have slips? That's a great question.
Yeah, great question. First date, no, not yet. Second date, third date. If you're starting to get serious, if you're starting to, really share, like, here are my problems, and she's responding in, if you're starting to think this might be a real relationship, it's time to share. Okay, I feel it's getting closer, and I think it's important that you know this about me, because before you move forward, I need you to know who I am and what I'm working on. And most people will absolutely respect that, and will actually respect you more for telling them, and this is what I'm doing about it. I go to a meeting on every Tuesday and Thursday. That's why I'm not available for dates on Tuesday and Thursday, things like that. As far as slips and relapses and things like that, that's something the two of you should discuss, about how much she wants to know and when she wants to know it.
Yeah, and I think it can even start with the, I've struggled with some compulsive behaviors. I mean, you can do the layers of, and if she's like, okay, and she hasn't run out the door, then it's like, okay, if she's like, tell me more, what and what, see where it goes. You can always share more, but yeah, the first date of like, and I'm a porn addict, and that may be off-putting. It does clear through things pretty quickly. So
yeah, but I mean, fourth or fifth date, somewhere around there, I think for most relationships, just like, hey, I really like you. Before we move forward, I just want you to know the crap about me so that you're not surprised by it later. And people will respect that more, and they usually come out and share their, I've been in therapy for this for 16 years, whatever. And it's a way to actually become more intimate in a relationship, is sharing your lesser self. So
yes, the glossy facade, you can only hold that up for so long, and then if you really want to have an intimate, and that's, intimacy is not sex, remember. So if you really want to have an intimate relationship, you do have to be willing to be vulnerable and share the all of you, the different, the good, the not so good. So, but recovery is a great thing. I mean, honestly, we started, but before I get way off on a tangent, but before we started the recording, Scott has co-authored a book with Kristen Snowden, who's one of our contributors, on the second Wednesday of the month. We just had a recording last week about working the 12 steps for non-addicts, because it's such a great way to live. So it's one of those where, if you don't have an addiction and you can't really relate, it's still, these are skills that are so valuable for living life in a integrated, not compartmentalized, honest, integrity way. So do you have a photo of the?
I would show that book off, but I do not have my author copies yet.
Okay. For future,
Anonymous.
And it is available on Amazon. I sent somebody the link earlier today. So, okay. So our chemsex addicts who are managing their own recovery, aka not doing any meetings or therapy, but sober-ish, soberish, still so deep in denial and shame that they are not able to look at themselves. And that's tragic to me. So, or why would they not opt to continue with meetings and therapy?
You know, as addicts, I don't care what the addiction is. If we could get sober on our own, we would, but we can't. That's why we're here. you know, and particularly chemsex, which is usually meth or cocaine fused with sexual behavior. That is, sexual behavior is very hard to get sober from. Stimulant drugs, meth and sex, are very hard to get sober from. And when you pair them or fuse them, it just makes it even harder. So
not impossible, but
not impossible, but it requires outside assistance. I mean, this is an addiction that requires professional help and 12-step help and support groups. And it just, a lot of effort and a lot of people need to be involved. So a chemsex addict who's not doing any of that is just not going to stay sober. It's just not going to happen.
Well, and that's like I've talked before about the hanging on by your fingertips. It's like so miserable. That is the most miserable way to live. Is like, I'm not really acting out. I can't do this, so I've got to stay away from that. And it's this whole huge deal. But so you don't have the relief that numbing out and fantasy and acting out brings. But you don't have the relief of the recovery yet. So you're in the worst spot. And yes, it's often shame, or somebody's just not really willing to give it up yet. And so, but there's a saying, our best thinking got us here. And that's, so us managing our own recovery, is a really, and I would anticipate this person is maybe abstinent, definitely not in recovery, and B, probably headed for the first thing that trips them is, probably a relapse. So
yeah, when I came into recovery, I wanted my consequences to stop. I didn't want to make any life changes, but I wanted people to think that I was doing the work. So I agreed to go to therapy. And my therapist said, no, you have to go to 12-step meetings too. And I resisted for months. And he finally threatened to fire me as a client if I didn't go to, that's why I went to 12-step meetings, finally. But I didn't get a sponsor. I didn't work, I just wasn't willing to do the work because I didn't want to get sober. I didn't want to change my behavior at that point. Later, a couple years later, I realized I can't live this way anymore. I don't want to live this way anymore. I know enough about recovery now to know what I need to do, which is therapy and meetings and some other work. And then I was able to get and stay sober really easily, but because I started doing the work and immersing myself in a community of recovery. Until I was willing to do that, I just spun in and out of my addiction for a couple of years, and it was not pretty.
No, and the co-occurring is, sex addiction has its own risks. I'm very clear on, it's not without its risks. The chemsex always terrifies me. I really feel like it's Russian roulette. You just don't know if this is going to be the time. So I hope and pray that recovery is chosen. So, okay, next question. What recommendation do you have for someone who is in a remote area that cannot find a CSAT and apparently cannot be treated remotely across state lines? Currently looking for one in Alaska and not have had any success. I can answer this one. I answer these calls and emails all the time. So you're right. They cannot do therapy across state lines. However, I have some great Canadian therapists who are not encumbered by that. So I refer some great Canadian therapists to people who are in remote areas. There's a couple of states that have no CSATs. There's some that have CSATs that wouldn't be my first choice, shall we say. So it's one of those where email me, Tami, Tami, at seekingintegrity.com, include where you're located, and I will do my best to help you find some qualified options. That said, I also refer US therapists to, I get emails from people. I think I had somebody in Bangladesh today. It all kind of runs together, but I do get calls for people all over the world, and I want to help them find oh, it was Budapest. I was like, it was a B, it was Budapest. But I do help them find, people who are the right fit. So, hopefully I can give people enough resources that they can find somebody in the list that I give them. So you're right. People go, oh, it's COVID. You can go, everybody's working via Zoom. Yes, but, somebody, in Alaska cannot be seeing somebody in North Carolina for therapy. They can see them for coaching, which is completely different, has its own value, but that is not therapy, cannot be doing the underlying work, can be talking about practical things and moving forward, but not addressing the underlying issues, that are behind the, the whys of, of the acting out. So I hope that helps.
Well stated.
Okay. I used to watch porn and stopped maybe around 6 months ago. I never thought this was an issue, but it was my girlfriend's. But it was for my girlfriend. So I found out that I used it as a soothing mechanism, watching and masturbating. I was diagnosed with ADD and giving Adderall, and my life changed. Porn was easy to give up. Now I don't have any interest in it, but she left, and now I have to figure out why I have lack emotion.
Yeah, this is a good question. Dr. Rob is working on a book about pornography right now, and it's mostly written, and it deals with one of the big reasons we wanted to put that book together was we are seeing different categories of porn addicts or heavy porn users or porn compulsives, whatever we want to call it. There's the traditional addict, which is definitely driven by unresolved early life trauma. There's a history of that, usually from childhood. It creates feelings of shame and just not being good enough, and we self-medicate using alcohol, drugs, porn, whatever. With porn, we're now finding a second category of addict. Usually, it's younger people, younger males, who are exposed to porn at a very early age, and they've continued to use it up through into adulthood. And now they're having relationships, and the relationships aren't working because they're just not there emotionally. And what happens is there's a developmental delay. Porn becomes sex education. It becomes sexual fulfillment. And we also become conditioned to the sexual and emotional intensity that porn provides. And usually a single real world partner just can't live up to this constantly changing barrage of sexual imagery. The intensity just isn't there. And you're saying, now I have to figure out why I lack emotion. You've been using porn for a long, long time to avoid emotion, to avoid feelings of stress and vulnerability and fear and loneliness and boredom and God knows what else. All those other things we don't want to feel. And you're conditioned to, just replacing that with an intense experience, which in this case is porn, but it could also be meth or coke or whatever. Your brain is going to have to reset. What happens over time is we start pumping out dopamine with this intensity, and our brains adjust. We reduce the number of dopamine receptors and also the amount of dopamine we produce. So we struggle to experience pleasure because our brain it's recognizing this excessive dopamine that's floating around in the brain thanks to the porn. So it adjusts, and it's going to take about a year for your brain to readjust. The good news is it will readjust. The younger you are, the faster that will happen. Sometimes young porn users are back to normal in a month. Somebody my age, it would take a lot longer. So that's probably the situation, is you've just conditioned yourself to that intensity, and now without that intensity, everything feels blah. And it's gonna be that way for a while, but it's temporary. That's the good news. If you stay away from porn and also stay away from cigarettes and booze and all the other stuff, your brain will reset. If you stay away from the other stuff, your brain will reset faster. So
in the chat, I just put I should have put Dr. Todd Love. He did a video on the In the Room Super Saturday Recovery Summit. And he talks about ADHD. It is fascinating. I highly recommend you watch that video. It's less than an hour, but he did a really good job of talking about that and how it affects things. So I would invite you to I'm really bad at meds and all that. Dr. David on Wednesday night can address, Adderall and all of those things. But Dr. Todd Love talks specifically about being on time release and how important it is. So it's a really valuable video. And there's a bunch more on there too about different topics.
Because ADHD meds misused can keep you in the addiction.
Yes. Yeah. I was kind of surprised because Adderall I see often in conjunction with it. So when but when he put that it made it easy to stop porn. So, and I often see that as adding to, so I don't know.
Used properly, it's very helpful. Used improperly, it's very unhelpful.
Correct. So here's a great question. Do all sex addicts fear intimacy, or is there a strain of these addicts who don't fear it? I think fear is the wrong word. I think intimacy disorders, and so it's, sometimes it's, I want you, but I don't. So that push me, pull ya. So what are your thoughts?
Traditional addiction, which I just mentioned in this childhood trauma sense, we learn early in our lives that people who should love us and care for us and help us emotionally regulate can't be trusted. They're inconsistent, or they're addicted, or they're mentally ill, or they just don't want to have kids. Or so we learn these things and we internalize them, and we become afraid. I actually think fear is the right word, of reaching out to other people in an emotionally intimate way. And so we turn, and as a 12-year-old kid, if I had a bad day at school, rather than going home and telling my very, very emotionally absent father, or my somewhat erratic and nutty mother, who could react in 100 different ways, all of which were going to be bad, I kept things to myself, and I learned to self-soothe on my own. I found alcohol, I found drugs, I found masturbation, I found pornography, all very early. And those things worked for me for a long time. They were my coping skills when I was struggling emotionally. So rather than turning to other people, I turned to an addictive substance for behavior. That's classic addiction in a nutshell. Is there a strain of sex addicts who don't fear intimacy? Maybe. I haven't seen them. Maybe.
Yeah, but I think even, and so I was going with, there can be a perception of I'm intimate. It's the people that have, the emotional affairs and all of that. And it looks like it's, really intimate and all that. But I still think that there's, it's kind of this illusion of, because it's in a
fantasy and intensity.
Yeah. So while it may look like, I think that's where I was going, and fear may still be the right word, but I think there are some people that isolate and completely disengage and very much to themselves and very anonymous sex and all that. But there's this other, I hear all the time, the serial affairs, or the emotional 4-year emotional affair, those kind of things, and those look intimate. So if I was a partner of somebody like that, I'd be like, well, it looks like there's intimacy there. So anyway, so we'll see. Next question. If I decide to do the January work group, so that's the Sex Addiction 101 work group that you can find on seekingintegrity.com, is it suggested I get a sponsor? What's the best way to go about doing that? So what are your thoughts, since you are one of the moderators, leaders of this?
Yeah, the work groups are classes. So there's 6 sessions, 90 minutes each. We do stuff from this workbook, which is making its 3rd appearance. Sponsors are affiliated with 12-step recovery. So I would say definitely be in 12-step recovery, definitely get a sponsor, definitely talk to your sponsor about what you're doing in the work group and get feedback as you do the exercises from your sponsor. It's always advisable to have a sponsor. And I'll let Tami explain what a sponsor is, because she's actually been in recovery even longer than I have. But yeah, but I mean, you're not going to get a sponsor from the work group. It's a class, but going to 12-step meetings is where you find a sponsor.
Well, going to 12-step meetings, but I know that, so we have drop-in groups on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. And I do know that there are people who have at least peer support. A sponsor specifically is, always affiliated with a 12-step group or a 12-step type group. And a sponsor would be a guide to help you move through the steps. Now, Scott and I are big proponents of 12-step. The first 9 steps are what really helps us clean up the wreckage of our past so that we can, live in the present and move forward. So, so I do advise, I think having somebody who can guide you on that path. We talked a little bit earlier about, we would have done a terrible job of managing our own recovery and deciding what pieces we needed to do and what we should really avoid, because that might be problematic. So it really is, somebody who's going to help us, hold us accountable, support us, and guide us. People get, I always am concerned when people, it's a year down the road and they haven't done their 4-step yet. It drives me crazy. But those are the people that are more prone to relapse because they're still holding all the shame. They're not getting the freedom. The first 9 steps helps us clean the slate, and get rid of the 100 pounds of shame baggage that we're carrying around all the time. So having somebody that can help guide you, that knows you, somebody asked earlier about, should masturbation be, moved out of my inner circle. My sponsor is suggesting that. That means that sponsor knows that person well enough to go, I think it's time to do things a little differently. So
it's also important to say that tasks that you do in therapy are different than tasks that you do in the work group, which is a class. And those are different than tasks that you do in 12-step recovery. And when you bring all these things together, research showed when you bring professional help and 12-step recovery together, that's the best long-term outcome for recovering addicts, uniformly.
Yes. And how do you get somebody? You ask, you go in a 12-step room. InTheRooms.com, the Super Saturday Recovery Summit that I posted on there, that, they have a zillion, that's an exaggeration, but they have a lot of 12-step meetings every week. And they have places where you can find sponsors. Our drop-in groups, I know guys have found sponsors in those groups. And you just say, I need a sponsor. I need somebody to help. There is another men's group on, today is Monday, on Thursday morning, Pacific time. There's another Friday morning. There was one this morning. So there's multiple opportunities, to connect with other males. We have a female group too. So if you're a gal that needs support, there's help there too. So, but do sign up for that Sex Addiction 101 work group. And there's a female one starting in February too. So, okay. 2 of my grown children confronted me. This is a female, yesterday, said that I was hard to please and nothing is good enough for me. And that is why my husband fantasized for other women. I have told my husband he takes his fake fantasy wife who is happy and nice all the time. We have been married 40 years, separated 2 years. He failed his first polygraph, still working on disclosure. It's been 3 years since D-Day. I don't know what I should be doing with him. Oh. My heart breaks for you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Why don't you answer first?
Well, my heart breaks for you. So, I'm really sorry that your adult children got pulled into this. I want to start with that, and it sounds like your husband pulled them in and was like, it's your mom's fault. And that they've sided with, it doesn't matter what you do or don't do. It's, he had other choices. About doing, going to couples therapy and saying, I feel like you're really difficult to please, and how can we navigate this differently? There's lots of grown-up choices. You've been married 40 years, separated for 2 years. I guess my first question is, what do you want, and what are your boundaries around this? If it's been 3 years since D-Day, and he failed his first polygraph, still working on disclosure. Again, I'm not Catholic, but I always think of the Catholic term of purgatory being stuck in the in-between. Like I think of this all the time with these, where you're stuck, so you've been separated for 2 years. What's the plan? Do you have, what is the plan for moving this forward? Because, at the end of 2021, are you willing to be still stuck? So I would encourage you to get professional pro-dependent aligned support to look at what are good boundaries for you, how you can how you can be safe for you, and what do you want, going forward, so thoughts.
I'm just thinking old lady posse, and please don't
Yes,
take that
thank
the
you.
wrong way, because it's
No, no,
it's a
no.
bizarre name, but we love it, and it's a super popular group.
Yes, tomorrow morning, so Tuesday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time is the Old Lady Posse. They named it, and it's support, and it's people like yourself who have been in long-term relationships. Typically, kids are empty nesters and all of that. But I highly encourage, if you haven't already joined that, on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. Under events, you'll see the calendar. And you can join that. I've subbed in a few times. It is a good group. So
Yeah, and I don't think Tammy or I can sit here and tell you what to do with him or what to do with the relationship, but getting to know some people in a similar situation and hearing their stories and learning how they've worked through similar will help you
yes,
gain the clarity that you need.
yeah, and I really think it is about, because this is if you're stuck, if you guys are stuck, and it's just nobody's really moving forward, what do you want, what do you need to move forward, whatever that looks like. But that is an uncomfortable spot to be in. So oh, this is a good one. I love all these questions. They're all great. So what does a solid recovery plan look like? 10 months sober, newly sponsored and attending individual and couples counseling with a weekly STA meeting. Also already working on Dr. Rob's workbook. So
that's all great. A weekly 12-step meeting. I don't know. Did you act out once a week? Because I acted out every day. So
even if it was in your head,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be you actually did. It
could be. So my first year or two of recovery, I needed a meeting every day. And I needed group therapy too. I'm a big fan of group therapy for sex addicts, sex addiction focused group therapy, because I was deep in denial. Even as I was breaking through denial, there were just layers of denial. And there's no better place to work through that, and also to work through the shame that sex addicts carry around, than group therapy with other sex addicts. So yeah, but I mean, you're going to individual counseling, you're going to couples counseling, you're going to a weekly SCA meeting, ramp that up. You're doing the workbook, great. Few more 12-step meetings, and maybe ask your therapist about group therapy.
And ask your sponsor, what's my recovery plan look like? You've got a new sponsor, fantastic. That's what you talk to your sponsor about. What should I be doing? Here's where I am. Are you making changes fast enough that you feel it? You're feeling some relief because you're on a different trajectory. You're not, struggling with, oh my gosh, I compulsively want to act out. So.
And you should, anytime you have a new sponsor, there's a circle plan exercise or a sobriety plan or boundary plan. I forget what we call it in the workbook. You should do that exercise in the workbook with your sponsor. Anytime you get a new sponsor, even if you're 10 years sober, you should work that exercise again with your new sponsor. So definitely do that.
So the next question says, and to the person who asked the question earlier about how do you find a sponsor, one of the people that goes to the men's groups chimed in on the chat. We'll look after him in the group. So thank you. And I know you will. So, okay. So then this one is, hi, Scott and Tammy. My first question is, what is a sponsor? I have a general question in regard to Safe Harbor. What are some ways that Safe Harbor works? So let's start with sponsor.
A 12-step sponsor is the person, Tammy hit it earlier, who helps you guide you through the work of the 12 steps, and provides accountability and just kind of general guidance. They're not your banker, they're not your driver, they're not your chef, and nor are you their banker, driver, or chef. It is a mutually supportive relationship.
Yeah. And I think the language of the 12 steps, it's not that the language, it's like we have all these little, sayings that saved my bacon, quite frankly, but it's like you get there and they're like all talking, goofy, easy does it, but do it. Like, what? You know, I mean, like there's a million of those little sayings, and they are so meaningful and valuable to me because somebody taught me what they meant. And so, so they're just think of that person as your guide to, you know, I'm going to teach you, it's a little foreign language. Oh, it's life skills that I never learned, you know, and they're going to help guide you through that. So as far as safe harbor, that I think you're referring to putting your relationship in safe harbor, meaning you're holding the space. You're not going to, both of you agree to put it in safe harbor while you find out what you need, so that it isn't constantly someone throwing, I'm going to divorce you if you don't, you know, it's like we're both going to get help and support, and we're going to just see. And it's usually for a period of time, and it gets evaluated. It may be like 6 months, for the next 6 months or a year. We're going to put our relationship in safe harbor, and we're going to make sure we're getting help. And then we're going to, you know, we're going to see, because I can tell is an early on person, and they're, you know, so that means there's probably a crisis. And so just taking the pause and knowing that that is one decision that the two of you don't need to deal with in this moment, because you're going to work on getting help.
Yeah, I mean, always in recovery, a sponsor will say, no major life decisions here in the first year, because you're in crisis, and people in crisis do not make the best decisions. Once you're out of crisis, you can reassess. That's what a safe harbor is.
Yes.
You will reassess later.
Yes, but in the moment, we've got other things to deal with. So, okay, next question. Is full disclosure part of my therapy sessions, or it is a separate program and an added cost?
Full disclosure generally occurs in therapy somewhere around the 3 to 6 month mark after therapy begins. Typically, the addict will have an individual therapist, the betrayed partner will have an individual therapist, and there may even be a couples therapist who specializes in disclosure who's involved in this process. It's the addict basically answers all of the betrayed partner's questions about what happened, how often, all of that stuff in a very non-graphic way. The therapist makes sure those questions get answered, and then that's presented in a fully supported therapy session with support for each person after the session. It's a process. So is it automatically part of your therapy as a sex addict? Well, no, but if you're in a relationship, it's a really good idea if you want to save that relationship, and you're going to want to do it. Addicts tend to dread all of the disclosure, because if I tell her everything or him everything, you know, our relationship will end. Boom. And actually the opposite is true. Once you come clean and take a polygraph, usually, to prove that, yeah, that's everything, or at least everything that I can remember, your partner can start to trust you again. And if your partner is willing to sit through all of that and go through the process, there's a little back and forth that occurs. It's a process, not an event. It takes place over the course of a couple of weeks. Multiple therapists are involved. If your partner is willing to work through all of that, your partner is as committed to saving the relationship as you are. So disclosure is usually the beginning of the healing. But is it automatically part of therapy, or is it a separate? It's not, you know, it's something you need to do. And there are multiple therapists involved, and therapists get paid when they work. So there is a cost.
I want to clarify, it isn't that the actual day of disclosure is over weeks. I've actually heard of those where,
yeah, that's death by paper cut.
Yes. So you are working on coming up with your history, and you are putting the data in I had, you know, unprotected sex, you know, X amount of times, I spent this much money, whatever, you know, it's really, you know, probably Dr. Rob is talking 2 pages, you know, this is not the 100-page volume of, you know, everything I did on this date and with this person and all that. Some things that do need to be included, if there is, you know, it was, you know, your sister-in-law you had sex with, if it was, you know, in your house, you know, you know, I mean, there are certain things, you know, that do need to be disclosed, but your trained professional will know what needs to be part of it. and what doesn't, and how it needs to be packaged is probably the wrong word, but compiled is a better word, how it needs to be compiled. And then the partner needs to have support. And it isn't that the partner is, you know, is addicted or has issues from that standpoint. It's the partner needs support in order to, and there needs to be a plan. I mean, like there's a whole plan about how to do this. So, so more will be revealed. Use your professionals to guide the process. So,
and a poorly executed disclosure is more harmful than helpful. A well executed disclosure is the beginning of healing.
Yeah, like 92% of people say with a well done one are glad they did it. It laid the foundation for healing, you know. But the vomit disclosures where you go, I want to unburden myself. I want to tell you everything. Terrible idea. The drip, I've told you everything. You know, I've told you everything. And then there's discovery of more. Terrible, terrible, terrible. So, okay. We're running out of time, but I have intimacy issues because I don't show emotion and used to watch porn and masturbate. I love sex, but don't sleep around. I masturbate occasionally once a week to relax before I go to sleep to relieve stress. I don't watch porn anymore. My ex says I have an intimacy anorexia because I feel uncomfortable when giving hugs or saying I love you. She left because I didn't do any work on myself. So now I'm alone and trying to see what I can do to help myself. I believe I'm no longer a sex addict because I just lack empathy. What are your thoughts?
This is, you know, this requires a full assessment, biopsychosocial sexual assessment to really answer this question. But if you're struggling with intimacy and you use porn to relieve stress, and you can't maintain relationships and you're struggling with intimacy, empathy, these are red flags for sex addiction. All of them across the board. So I would email Tami and ask for a CSAT, certified sex addiction therapist in your area who can do an assessment and actually tell you what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I don't know you. I'm just what I'm reading, but I also even wondered, you know, there are some people that have, you know, can be on the Asperger's spectrum or something, you know, and just having knowledge of what you're really dealing with can be so helpful to get the right help. So be open to exploring, getting professional help to guide the process. And like
CSATs
I said,
are trained to assess for sex addiction, but they're also trained to assess for not sex addiction. You need this, not sex addiction.
Right. Yeah. So getting a really thorough assessment, you know, could be hugely helpful because we do want to be connected to people. So, okay. Oh, what is the workbook and where can I buy it? I put it in the chat, and I also put the work group that does the Sex Addiction 101. And somebody said I've used a Canadian CSAT that I recommended and it's worked good. Thank you. Is it possible we've got one more question. Is it possible for an addict to get a clear mind just from sharing childhood trauma? My SA husband says it was like a fog was lifted immediately.
I'm sorry, can you read that again? I was typing.
Is it possible for an addict to get a clear mind just for sharing childhood trauma? My SA husband said it was like a fog was lifted immediately.
Interesting question. My experience with trauma work is getting out the trauma is freeing, but it's not freedom. There's more work to be done. There's more processing. It's peeling the layers of the onion. I mean, you know, there's like the little paper layers, and then there's thicker layers of 100 papers in the onion. One trauma incident is like 100 little paper layers. It's one of those thicker layers of the onion. So he's peeled off the first little piece of paper on the onion, and it felt good. And maybe he cried a little bit, and that felt good. But wait until tomorrow. You know?
Well, and I could see that, you know, like if you have held this tightly, you know, I could absolutely, I could see that there would, you know, it would feel like there's a fog lifted, that I'm not dealing with that. So my email address, Tami, Tami @seekingintegrity.com. Email me at that. So you know, everybody experiences things differently. I have, you know, I've done EMDR, and I had something that was really bothering me, and I did EMDR on that particular issue, and it has, and I'm not exaggerating, it has not ever returned like that. And that was a huge freedom for me. I didn't feel a mind fog, but I wasn't feeling a mind fog about that. So I don't know about that. I do know that, doing the work changes things.
And I can verify that from my own experience. Doing trauma work really does lift the power of that trauma. But it's more than just telling the story once and woof, it's gone.
Right.
You got to do some more work.
Yeah.
But that initial reaction can feel so good.
Yeah.
So I get what he's saying, but he's going to have another layer to deal with.
Yes, I think so too. So, well, my friend Scott, we're out of time and we're out of questions. We finished them all. So thank you all for joining us and hanging with us. Dr. Rob will be back next week, but grateful that you were here with me, Scott. And we'll see all of you on upcoming webinars. Take care. Bye-bye.